The communication array crackled with static as Captain Sarah Chen adjusted her headset inside the cramped cockpit of her Viper-class fighter. Around her, the cold metal walls hummed with the vibrations of a ship pushed to its limits, racing through the asteroid field of the Kepler 442 system. Her hands moved across the control panels with practiced precision, each switch and button as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Ghostwing, this is command. Status report," came the voice of Admiral Morrison through the comm system. The aging officer's tone carried the weight of a man who had seen too many good pilots die in the war against the Nexari Collective. Sarah glanced at her tactical display, where dozens of red dots represented the enemy fleet that had been hunting her strike team for the past 6 hours. The Nexari ships moved in perfect formation, their sleek hulls reflecting the light of the system's twin suns like polished obsidian. Each vessel was a masterpiece of engineering, built by a civilization that had conquered half the galaxy through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. "Still breathing, Command. Enemy fleet maintaining pursuit vector. They're herding us exactly where they want us," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. She had learned long ago that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when lives depended on her decisions. The irony wasn't lost on her that the aliens had chosen this particular system for their trap. Kepler 442 had once been humanity's greatest hope for expansion, a system with 3 habitable worlds that could have housed billions of refugees from Earth's overcrowded cities. Instead, it had become another casualty of the Nexari war machine, its colonies reduced to radioactive ash 3 years ago. "Understood, Ghostwing. Intelligence suggests they're driving you toward the debris field around Kepler 442c. Our long-range sensors show significant enemy reinforcements waiting in that sector." Admiral Morrison's voice carried a note of resignation that Sarah had heard too often lately. The war wasn't going well for humanity. Sarah's fighter shuddered as another asteroid tumbled past, close enough that she could see the pockmarks left by countless meteor impacts. The Nexari had chosen their hunting ground well. The asteroid field provided perfect cover for an ambush, while the gravitational anomalies around the dead planet made long-range scanning nearly impossible. "Copy that, Command. Any word on reinforcements?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. The 7th Fleet was 3 days away, and the 5th Fleet had been decimated at Proxima Centauri 2 weeks ago. Humanity was running out of ships, running out of pilots, and running out of time. "Negative, Captain. You're on your own for now. Orders are to avoid engagement and return to base if possible." The Admiral's words carried the unspoken message that Sarah had heard in briefings across the fleet. Earth needed every experienced pilot alive more than they needed heroic last stands. Sarah was about to respond when a new voice cut through the comm channel, speaking in the harsh, clicking language of the Nexari. The universal translator kicked in after a moment, rendering the alien words in emotionless synthetic tones. "Human pilot designated Ghostwing. You will surrender immediately and prepare for boarding. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction." The voice belonged to General Kazith, the architect of humanity's defeats at Wolf 359 and Vega Prime. Sarah had studied his tactics for months, memorizing every battle he had fought, every strategy he had employed. Before Sarah could respond, Kazith continued, and she could hear something that chilled her more than the threats. Laughter. Deep, rumbling laughter that seemed to echo through the comm channel like the sound of grinding stone. "Ghostwing," Kazith repeated, and the laughter grew louder. "Tell me, human, how does one earn such a ridiculous designation? Did you once fly through a cloud of dust? Perhaps you are transparent like the spirits your primitive species believes in?" More voices joined in the laughter, and Sarah realized that Kazith had opened the channel to his entire command staff. The mockery was deliberate, designed to humiliate and demoralize. It was a classic Nexari psychological warfare technique, one that had broken the spirits of countless alien races before humanity. "Your call sign amuses my officers greatly," Kazith continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "In 2 millennia of conquest, we have faced warriors with names that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Deathbringer of the Altarian Empire, Voidrender of the Crystalline Collective, Starkiller of the Andromedans. And now we face Ghostwing. How wonderfully pathetic." Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she forced herself to remain calm. The general was trying to provoke her into making a mistake, into revealing her position or acting rashly. She had seen too many good pilots die because they let anger cloud their judgment. "I am curious," Kazeth's voice continued. "How does one become a ghost?" Do you disappear when combat begins? Do you fade away at the first sign of danger? Perhaps your human commanders gave you this name because you are already dead, and simply haven't realized it yet. The laughter from the Nixari bridge crew grew louder, and Sarah could hear similar sounds coming from other ships in the enemy fleet. Her call sign had become a source of entertainment for an entire alien armada. But Sarah Chen knew something that General Kazith didn't. She knew exactly how she had earned the name Ghostwing, and it had nothing to do with fear or cowardice. The story began 5 years ago, during her first tour of duty aboard the carrier Lexington, when she was just another rookie pilot trying to prove herself in a war that seemed impossible to win. The nickname had started as an insult, whispered behind her back by other pilots who thought she was too cautious, too unwilling to engage in the kind of aggressive combat that the war demanded. They called her Ghost because she seemed to disappear from battles, vanishing from combat zones when other pilots were still fighting. What they didn't understand, what none of them understood until much later, was that Sarah had developed a completely different approach to aerial combat. While other pilots focused on destroying enemy fighters, Sarah had learned to read the larger patterns of battle, to see opportunities that existed not in individual duels, but in the complex dance of fleet movements. She didn't disappear from battles. She repositioned herself to strike at the moments when her attacks would have maximum impact on the entire engagement. She studied enemy formations until she could predict their movements, waited for the precise instant when a single well-placed shot could cascade into devastating consequences for the enemy fleet. The wing part of her call sign had come later, after she had begun training other pilots in her unconventional tactics. She didn't just fight alone anymore. She had learned to coordinate small groups of fighters, turning them into precision instruments that could outmaneuver and outthink enemy formations 10 times their size. But Kazith knew none of this. To him, she was just another human pilot with a foolish name, flying alone through an asteroid field with nowhere to run. He saw her as prey, wounded and cornered, ready to be finished off by the greatest military mind in Nixari history. Sarah checked her navigation display and saw that she was approaching the debris field around Kepler 442c. The planet hung in space like a broken jewel, its surface still glowing with the radioactive aftermath of Nexari orbital bombardment. Chunks of shattered moon drifted in chaotic orbits, the remnants of what had once been a beautiful Earth-like world. Still hiding among the rocks, little ghost? Kazith's voice came through the comm again, thick with amusement. You cannot run forever. My ships have surrounded this entire system. Surrender now, and I might allow you to die with some small measure of dignity and tact. Sarah's finger hovered over the comm switch, but she didn't respond. There was no point in exchanging words with the general. Everything that mattered would be decided in the next few minutes, as the Nexari fleet moved into position for what they believed would be the final phase of the hunt. Instead, Sarah began reviewing the tactical data she had been collecting throughout the chase. Her ship's sensors had been passively scanning the enemy formation, recording movement patterns, energy signatures, and communication protocols. While Kazith had been focused on the psychological aspects of the pursuit, Sarah had been studying his fleet like a chess grandmaster analyzing an opponent's opening moves. The Nexari formation was impressive, a perfect example of their military doctrine. Heavy battleships formed the outer perimeter, their massive weapons capable of destroying anything that tried to escape the system. Cruisers filled the middle ranks, ready to pursue and engage any targets that broke through the initial line. Fast attack fighters swarmed around the larger ships like angry insects, prepared to overwhelm any opposition through sheer numbers. It was exactly the kind of formation that had crushed human fleets throughout the war. The Nexari had refined their tactics over centuries of conquest, turning space combat into a precise art form. They moved with mechanical precision, each ship knowing its exact role in the larger pattern of destruction. But Sarah had spent years studying those patterns, and she had begun to see something that other human strategists had missed. The Nexari formation was perfect, but it was also predictable. Their adherence to doctrine was both their greatest strength and their most significant weakness. Final warning, human. Kazith's voice carried a note of impatience now. My patience grows thin. Surrender immediately, or face the consequences of defying the Nexari collective. Sarah finally activated her comm system, her voice calm and professional, despite the circumstances surrounding her. General Kazith, this is Captain Sarah Chen. Call sign Ghostwing. I've heard a lot about your reputation. Have you indeed? Kazith's tone was mocking. And what have you heard, little ghost? I've heard that you've never lost a battle, Sarah replied. 20 years of continuous victory, 47 major engagements, 7 species completely eliminated. It's an impressive record. It is indeed, and you are about to become a footnote in that record, human. Another insignificant pilot destroyed while fleeing from superior forces. Sarah smiled grimly as she adjusted her ship's course, angling toward a specific section of the debris field. That's where you're wrong, General. I'm not fleeing from your forces. I'm leading them exactly where I want them. The laughter that came through the comm was loud enough to make Sarah wince. You? Leading my fleet? Child, I've been conducting space battles since before your species learned to build metal ships. You think your primitive tactics can match 2,000 years of Mixari military evolution? I think, Sarah said quietly, that you're about to find out why they call me Ghostwing. Sarah's fingers danced across her control panel as she dove deeper into the debris field surrounding the dead planet. Chunks of metal and rock tumbled past her fighter, remnants of the orbital stations and defense platforms that had once protected Kepler. 442C. Each piece told a story of the world's final moments, when Nixari bombardment had turned a thriving human colony into a graveyard floating in space. Her ship sensors painted a three-dimensional map of the debris field on her tactical display, showing the complex web of gravitational interactions that governed the movement of countless fragments. To most pilots, it would have looked like chaos, a random scattering of obstacles that made navigation treacherous and combat nearly impossible. But Sarah had spent months studying this particular graveyard, learning its patterns and hidden structures. Behind her, the Nexari fleet was moving into position with mechanical precision. General Kazat's flagship, the Dominion's Edge, led the formation with its escort of heavy cruisers. The massive vessel stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. It was a monument to Nexari engineering, capable of reducing entire cities to ash with a single salvo. Ghostwing, this is foolish beyond measure. Kazat's voice came through the comm system again. The general's tone had shifted from amusement to something approaching professional interest. You fly toward a dead end, human. The debris field offers no escape route. My ships control every approach vector. Sarah checked her navigation display, noting the positions of the Nexari vessels as they spread out to surround the debris field. The general was right about one thing. Traditional escape routes had been systematically blocked. Any conventional pilot would be trapped, forced to either surrender or die fighting overwhelming odds. Perhaps you believe the debris will provide cover, Kazath continued, his words carrying the confidence of someone who had seen every possible tactic employed against his forces. It will not. My ships carry deep penetration sensors that can track your vessel through any amount of interference. Hiding is not an option. Sarah smiled grimly as she adjusted her course, threading her fighter between two massive chunks of what had once been an orbital manufacturing platform. The twisted metal structures cast strange shadows in the light of the twin suns, creating a maze of darkness and brilliant illumination that played tricks on both organic eyes and electronic sensors. Or perhaps, the general's voice took on a note of cold calculation, you hope to use the debris as weapons, launching asteroids at my ships like some primitive catapult. Such tactics might work against inexperienced commanders, but I have faced similar strategies from species far more advanced than your own. What Kazeth didn't know, what none of the Nexari understood about human military doctrine, was that Sarah represented something entirely new in the galaxy's long history of warfare. She wasn't just a pilot, or even a tactician. She was something that the rigid, hierarchical structure of alien military thinking couldn't easily categorize. 3 years ago, during the Siege of New Geneva, Sarah had been assigned to a special research unit tasked with analyzing Nexari combat patterns. While other pilots focused on learning to fly better or shoot straighter, Sarah had immersed herself in the mathematical structures that governed space combat. She studied physics, psychology, systems theory, and game theory, searching for weaknesses in apparently perfect alien strategies. The breakthrough had come when she realized that the Nexari approach to warfare was fundamentally different from human thinking. Where humans adapted and improvised, aliens followed doctrine. Where humans embraced chaos and uncertainty, aliens sought order and predictability. The very qualities that made the Nexari such formidable conquerors also made them vulnerable to approaches they couldn't anticipate. Sarah's fighter swept past the burned-out hull of a transport ship, its cargo bay doors hanging open like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. The ship's identification markers were still visible on its hull, the Prosperity, registered out of New Singapore. She remembered reading about it in the casualty reports. 3,000 civilians, including 500 children, vaporized when the Nexari had opened fire on evacuation vessels. My sensors indicate you have reduced speed, human, Kazith observed. Are you finally coming to your senses? Good. Prepare for boarding. My troops will be gentle if you cooperate. Instead of responding, Sarah activated a secondary communication channel, one that broadcast on a frequency used by human military forces for emergency coordination. Her message was brief and encoded, but it would be picked up by listening posts throughout the sector. Command, this is Ghostwing. Initiating Operation Neurobreak. Time index mark? Now. The code phrase meant nothing to the Nexari, but it would alert human forces that something significant was about to happen in the Kepler 442 system. More importantly, it would ensure that whatever happened next would be recorded and analyzed by human intelligence services. Sarah had spent the past 6 months preparing for this moment. Not just the tactical aspects, but the psychological and strategic elements as well. She knew that defeating Kazeth wasn't just about destroying his ships. It was about proving that human military thinking could compete with alien superiority, that Earth's defenders were more than just desperate survivors clinging to obsolete strategies.
Operation Mirror Break? Kazeth's voice carried a note of curiosity.
How quaint. Your species does love its dramatic names for futile gestures. Very well, Ghostwing. I will indulge your desire for theatrics. Show me this mirror that you believe you can break. Sarah's ship approached the heart of the debris field, where the largest concentration of wreckage created a dense maze of obstacles. Here, the remains of Kepler 442 sees primary orbital station hung in space like a metallic spiderweb, its structural supports twisted into impossible shapes by the violence of its destruction. The station had been humanity's pride in this system, a massive structure capable of housing 50,000 people and serving as the hub for interplanetary commerce. Now it existed as a monument to Nexari ruthlessness, a warning to other species about the price of resistance. But Sarah saw something else in the wreckage. She saw an opportunity that had been waiting 3 years for someone with the right combination of skills and desperation to recognize it. All ships, move to attack formation, Kazeth commanded, and Sarah could hear the order being relayed throughout the Nexari fleet. Target the human vessel for precision strike. I want to disable, not destroy. This pilot has shown unusual tactical awareness. She may provide useful intelligence under interrogation. The enemy formation began to shift, battleships moving into position to provide overlapping fields of fire, while cruisers prepared to close in for the capture operation. It was textbook Nexari doctrine, executed with the precision that had made them masters of the galaxy. Sarah watched the enemy movements on her tactical display, comparing them to the predictive models she had spent months developing. The Nexari were following their standard procedures exactly, moving with the kind of coordinated efficiency that had crushed hundreds of other species. Everything was proceeding exactly as she had hoped. You know, General, Sarah said, activating her comm system again, I've been studying your tactics for a long time. Vega Prime, Wolf 359, the Battle of Titan's Gate. Every engagement you've ever commanded. Have you indeed? Kazeth's voice carried a note of professional interest. And what conclusions have you drawn, human? I've learned that you're absolutely brilliant, Sarah replied honestly. Your use of coordinated battleship formations to create overlapping kill zones is masterful. Your timing and deploying fighter screens to exploit enemy weaknesses is flawless. You might be the best military commander in the galaxy.
The silence that followed her words was so complete that Sarah wondered if the comm system had malfunctioned.
When Kazeth finally spoke, his voice carried a note of suspicion. You speak as though you admire my methods, yet you continue to resist. Explain yourself. Sarah's ship was now deep in the debris field, surrounded by the twisted remains of human dreams and alien violence. Around her, the Nexari fleet was tightening the noose, moving into position for what they believed would be the final phase of the hunt. I do admire your methods, General. That's exactly the problem. Sarah's voice was calm, almost conversational. You see, you're so good at what you do that you've become predictable. You follow your doctrine because it works, because it's brought you victory after victory for 20 years. Doctrine exists because it is effective, human. Improvisation is the refuge of inferior minds. Maybe, Sarah conceded. But there's something you don't understand about human military thinking. We don't just study how to win battles. We study how to lose them. We analyze our defeats as carefully as our victories, looking for patterns and weaknesses that we can exploit. Sarah's ship passed through a gap between two massive chunks of station wreckage, and suddenly her tactical display lit up with new contacts. Hidden among the debris, concealed by the metal fragments and gravitational interference, were dozens of objects that hadn't been there when the Nexari had first scanned the area. And the most important thing I learned from studying your tactics, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a harder edge, is that you always assume your enemies will fight the battle you expect them to fight. The objects hidden in the debris field were revealing themselves now, their stealth systems deactivating as they powered up weapons and engines.
They weren't large ships or advanced fighters.
They were human-built autonomous defense platforms, each one roughly the size of a cargo container, but packed with sophisticated sensors and weapon systems. What? What are those? Kazith's voice carried the first note of uncertainty Sarah had heard from him. Those, General, are the reason they call me Ghostwing, Sarah replied. You see, I didn't get that call sign because I ran away from battles. I got it because I learned how to make entire fleets appear out of nowhere, like ghosts materializing from empty space. The defense platforms were fully operational now, their weapons trained on the Nexari ships, with targeting data provided by Sarah's fighter. Each platform was essentially a miniature battleship, carrying enough firepower to seriously damage a cruiser, and sophisticated enough electronic warfare capabilities to disrupt enemy sensors and communications. But more importantly, they represented something that the Nexari had never encountered before in their centuries of conquest. They were proof that human military thinking could evolve beyond the conventional patterns that aliens expected, that Earth's defenders were capable of innovations that established doctrine couldn't anticipate. Impossible. Kazith's voice was tight with disbelief. My sensors detected no fleet movements in this system. No human ships have approached these coordinates in months. You're absolutely right, Sarah confirmed. No ships approached these coordinates, but you were so focused on tracking ship movements that you never thought to look for something else. Something that could have been here all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The truth was both simpler and more complex than Kazith imagined. The defense platforms hadn't been brought to Kepler 442 by a fleet. They had been built here, assembled from components smuggled into the system over the course of months by civilian transport ships that appeared to be carrying routine supplies to salvage operations. Sarah had spent half a year coordinating the secret deployment, working with engineers and strategists who shared her vision of a new kind of warfare. They had identified hundreds of locations throughout human space where similar defensive networks could be established, hidden among debris fields and asteroid clusters until the moment they were needed.
You see, General, Sarah said, as the defense platforms completed their targeting solutions, the thing about ghosts is that they don't just disappear.
Sometimes they come back to haunt you. The moment of revelation stretched across space like a held breath. General Kazith's flagship, the Dominion's Edge, hung motionless in the void as dozens of targeting sensors locked onto its hull. Around the massive battleship, the rest of the Nexari fleet found themselves facing an impossible situation. Enemy weapons had appeared from nowhere, emerging from what their instruments had assured them was empty debris. All ships, emergency defensive posture. Kazith's voice cut through the comm channels, his earlier amusement replaced by the sharp efficiency of a commander adapting to unexpected circumstances. Deploy countermeasures and prepare for engagement. Sarah watched from her position deep in the debris field as the alien fleet began to react. Even caught off guard, the Nexari moved with impressive coordination. Shield generators hummed to life, point defense systems swiveled to track the hidden platforms, and heavy weapons began charging for return fire. It was a testament to their training and discipline that they could respond so quickly to a completely unforeseen threat. But Sarah had counted on that response. In fact, she had planned for it. Impressive reaction time, General, she said through the comms system, her voice carrying genuine professional respect. 7.3 seconds from first contact to defensive formation. That's actually faster than the simulations predicted. You planned this entire encounter? Kazith's voice carried a note of disbelief that no amount of military training could completely suppress. The chase, the debris field, even my fleet's pursuit vector? Down to the last detail, Sarah confirmed. Well, almost. I had hoped you would position your flagship about 2 kilometers further spinward, but close enough for the targeting solutions to remain effective. The truth was even more complex than the general could imagine. Sarah hadn't just planned this specific engagement. She had spent months studying Nexari tactical doctrine, identifying the precise conditions that would lead to this exact formation and positioning. Every aspect of the chase had been calculated to funnel Kazith's ships into the optimal location for maximum effectiveness of the hidden defense network. Fascinating, Kazith murmured, and Sarah could hear the grudging admiration in his voice. A strategic ambush planned months in advance, executed by a single pilot operating alone. Such patience and foresight are, unusual in your species. That's where you're wrong again, General, Sarah replied. I'm not operating alone. I never was. As if responding to her words, Sarah's communication array came alive with new signals. Throughout the Kepler 442 system, previously silent monitoring stations began broadcasting coordination data. Hidden relay satellites activated, creating a network of real-time battlefield information that connected every defensive platform to every other element of the operation. But more than that, the communication network revealed something that made Kazith's earlier laughter seem hollow and distant. Sarah's voice was joined by dozens of others, human pilots scattered across multiple star systems, each one providing tactical support and coordination for the engagement.
Ghostwing, this is Wraith Leader, standing by with fire support. Came a voice from the direction of the asteroid belt. Ghostwing, this is Phantom Squadron, sensors active and tracking multiple targets. Another voice reported from somewhere near the system's edge.
Ghostwing, this is Spectre Base. All defensive systems are online and awaiting your command. Kazith's sensors were finally beginning to penetrate the electronic camouflage that had hidden the true scope of the human operation. What he had believed to be a single fleeing pilot was revealing itself to be the central coordinator of a distributed network that spanned the entire star system. How? Kazith's voice was barely more than a whisper. How did you deploy so many assets without detection? My intelligence network should have identified any major human military operations in this sector. Sarah's laughter was nothing like the mocking tones that had come from the Nixari bridge earlier. It was the sound of someone who had spent months preparing for a moment that others thought was impossible. Because you were looking for the wrong thing, General. You were watching for fleet movements, major supply operations, obvious military deployments. You weren't looking for a maintenance crew that took 3 extra days to repair a communications relay, or a mining operation that accidentally drilled their shafts in patterns that could house defensive weapons, or a scientific expedition that happened to leave behind monitoring equipment in very specific locations. The scope of the deception was beginning to dawn on the Nixari commander. Sarah hadn't just planned an ambush. She had orchestrated a months-long intelligence operation that had hidden military assets behind completely ordinary civilian activities. Every human presence in the system over the past 6 months had contributed some element to the defensive network that now surrounded his fleet. Impossible, Kazith said, but his voice lacked conviction. Such coordination would require a completely different approach to military organization. Sarah finished. One that doesn't depend on hierarchical command structures and rigid doctrine. One that treats every civilian as a potential intelligence asset, and every routine activity as an opportunity for strategic preparation. Sarah's tactical display was now showing the complete scope of the operation. The hidden defense platforms were just the most visible element of a network that included sensor stations, communication relays, supply caches, and even automated repair facilities. It was a defensive system that could operate independently for months, adapting to changing circumstances without requiring constant orders from a central command authority. You see, General, the thing about human military thinking is that we don't just prepare for the battles we expect to fight. We prepare for the battles we hope we'll never have to fight. Every human colony, every trading post, every scientific station is potentially part of our defensive network. Kazith was silent for a long moment, and Sarah could almost hear the alien general reassessing everything he thought he knew about human military capabilities. The Nexari had conquered hundreds of species, but they had always done so by overwhelming conventional military forces with superior technology and tactics. They had never faced an enemy that could turn an entire star system into a hidden fortress. But why? Kazith finally asked. Why go to such elaborate lengths for a single engagement? Why not simply evacuate this system and concentrate your forces elsewhere? The question cut to the heart of everything Sarah had been working toward. The defense of Kepler 442 wasn't just about protecting one star system or winning one battle. It was about proving that humanity could compete with alien military thinking, that Earth's defenders were more than just desperate survivors clinging to obsolete strategies. Because this isn't about winning one battle, General. This is about changing the entire nature of the war. Sarah's voice took on a harder edge. For 3 years you've been fighting humans who are trying to match your tactics, trying to beat you at your own game. Ship against ship, fleet against fleet, following the same patterns of warfare that have governed galactic conflict for millennia. Sarah's ship was moving again, threading through the debris field with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where every obstacle was located. Around her, the defense platforms were adjusting their positions, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the entire area into a lethal maze for any hostile vessel. But humans don't have to follow your patterns, General. We don't have to accept your definitions of how space combat should work. We can create entirely new paradigms of warfare, new ways of thinking about strategy and tactics that your doctrine can't anticipate or counter. The Nexari fleet was beginning to probe the defenses now, sending out small groups of fighters to test the response capabilities of the hidden platforms. Sarah watched their movements with professional interest, noting how they adapted their standard reconnaissance patterns to account for the unknown threat environment. Your fighters are maintaining formation discipline, she observed. Classic Nexari doctrine for unknown threat assessment. Probe with minimal assets, gather intelligence, develop countermeasures before committing major forces. Of course, Kazith replied, and some of his earlier confidence seemed to be returning. I may have been surprised by your preparations, human, but I am not defeated. Your defensive platforms are impressive, but they are stationary. My ships retain mobility and numerical superiority. True, Sarah acknowledged. But you're still thinking in terms of conventional engagement parameters. You're assuming this is going to be a normal space battle, just with a few unexpected obstacles. Sarah's ship reached the center of the debris field, where the twisted remains of the orbital station created a cathedral of shattered metal and broken dreams. Here, hidden among the largest pieces of wreckage, was the true heart of her operation. Not just another weapons platform, but something that would fundamentally alter the General's understanding of what was possible in space combat. Let me ask you something, General. Sarah said as her ship settled into position near what had once been the station's command center. In all your years of conquest, in all the battles you've fought against dozens of different species, have you ever encountered an enemy that could learn and adapt in real time during an engagement? All competent military forces adapt to battlefield conditions, Kazith replied. But there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. No, General. I'm not talking about tactical adaptation. I'm talking about fundamental strategic evolution. The ability to rewrite the basic rules of engagement while the battle is still in progress. Sarah's hands moved across her control panel, activating systems that had been dormant for months. Deep within the wreckage of the orbital station, massive computational systems came online, their processing power devoted to a single task. They began analyzing every aspect of the Nexari fleet's movements, communication patterns, weapon signatures, and tactical responses. But more than that, they began learning. What I'm showing you today isn't just a new type of defensive system, General. It's a proof of concept for something much more significant. Artificial intelligence systems that can analyze alien military doctrine in real time and develop counters faster than any biological commander can adapt. The AI systems hidden in the station wreckage were already beginning to demonstrate their capabilities. The defense platforms started moving in ways that seemed almost organic, repositioning themselves to account for subtle changes in Nexari formation patterns. Targeting solutions shifted and evolved as the AI learned to predict enemy movements with increasing accuracy. Each time your ships adjust their tactics, my systems learn something new about Nexari military thinking, Sarah explained. Each communication intercept teaches them more about your command structure and decision-making processes. In essence, General, you're not just facing a hidden fleet. You're facing an opponent that gets smarter every minute you remain in this system. Kazith's silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds, and Sarah could imagine the alien commander grappling with implications that went far beyond a single battle. If humans could deploy AI systems that could learn and adapt faster than biological intelligence could respond, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. You're bluffing, Kazith finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. Such technology would require computational resources beyond anything your species has demonstrated. Would it? Sarah asked. Or would it just require a different approach to the problem? You've been thinking in terms of massive centralized systems, the kind of overwhelming technological superiority that the Nexari use to dominate other species. But what if the solution doesn't require superior technology? What if it just requires superior thinking? As if to demonstrate her point, the AI systems began implementing tactics that no conventional military doctrine had ever anticipated. The defense platform started working in concert with the debris field itself, using gravitational interactions to slingshot projectiles along curved trajectories that bypass traditional point defense systems. Welcome to the future of warfare, General, Sarah said quietly. Human ingenuity augmented by artificial intelligence, creating strategies that evolve faster than any doctrine can counter. This is why they call me Ghostwing. Not because I disappear from battles, but because I've learned to make victory appear out of nowhere, like something that was never really there until the moment it manifests. The true scope of Sarah's achievement was beginning to reveal itself. She hadn't just created a sophisticated ambush or deployed an impressive defensive network. She had demonstrated a completely new paradigm for space combat, one that could potentially level the playing field between humanity and the technologically superior alien races that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. And General Kazeth, for the first time in his 20-year career, was beginning to understand what it felt like to face an opponent whose capabilities exceeded his ability to comprehend or counter. The artificial intelligence systems, hidden within the orbital station wreckage, processed combat data at speeds that would have been incomprehensible to biological minds. Every microsecond brought new understanding of Nexari tactical patterns, communication protocols, and technological capabilities. The AI was learning not just how to counter the alien fleet's current strategies, but how to predict and neutralize tactics that hadn't even been implemented yet. General Kazeth's voice cut through the comm channel with renewed determination. Enough of these games, human. Regardless of your technological innovations, you remain vastly outnumbered. All ships, commence bombardment pattern, Omega-7. Destroy every piece of debris larger than a fighter craft. The order represented classic Nexari thinking. When faced with an unexpected problem, apply overwhelming force until the problem ceased to exist. It was a strategy that had worked against countless alien civilizations, reducing their most sophisticated defenses to radioactive dust. Sarah watched her tactical display as the enemy battleships began charging their main weapon arrays. The energy signatures were impressive enough to make her fighters' radiation alarms chirp warnings. Each Nexari capital ship carried enough firepower to sterilize a small planet, and Kazeth was preparing to use all of it to eliminate the debris field that concealed her defensive network. "Interesting choice, General," Sarah observed, her voice remaining calm despite the magnitude of the threat building around her. Omega-7 bombardment pattern. I've seen the tactical analyses from Wolf 359. Very effective against stationary targets, especially when you have time to properly coordinate the firing solutions. Indeed, Kazeth replied, and Sarah could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Your hidden platforms may be clever, human, but they cannot move faster than the speed of light. My bombardment will eliminate this entire debris field in approximately 4 minutes. Whew. What the general didn't understand was that the AI systems had been analyzing Nexari bombardment patterns since the moment his ships had entered the system. The artificial intelligence had access to detailed records of every major engagement Kazeth had fought, studying his tactical preferences and timing protocols within human precision. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, actually, Sarah corrected. And that's assuming optimal coordination between your battleships and no interference from defensive countermeasures. The AI was already implementing response protocols that no human commander could have developed in real time. The defense platforms began moving in patterns that seemed almost random, but each movement was calculated to maximize survival probability based on predicted bombardment vectors. More importantly, the systems were preparing to demonstrate capabilities that would fundamentally alter Kazeth's understanding of the engagement. "You speak as though you can prevent the inevitable," Kazeth said. But there was a note of curiosity in his voice. "Your platforms are well concealed and cleverly positioned, but they are still bound by the laws of physics. They cannot escape the area of effect of our bombardment." "You're absolutely right, General. The platforms can't escape. But then again, they don't need to." Sarah's ship was moving through the debris field with increasing speed, no longer hiding among the wreckage but actively maneuvering in full view of Nexari sensors. Her fighter's engines blazed with brilliant blue light as she accelerated toward the edge of the bombardment zone. But instead of fleeing, Sarah was heading directly toward the nearest Nexari cruiser, her course plotted to bring her into weapons range just as the bombardment began. It was either an act of suicidal desperation or something far more calculated. "The human pilot approaches attack vector," one of Kazeth's subordinates reported. "Should we adjust bombardment timing to engage the fighter?" "Negative," Kazeth replied immediately. "Maintain firing sequence. One fighter cannot significantly alter the outcome of this engagement." The general's response was tactically sound according to conventional military thinking. A single human fighter posed no meaningful threat to a Nexari cruiser, and diverting resources to deal with it would only delay the bombardment that would eliminate the real threat from the hidden platforms. But Sarah wasn't planning a conventional attack. "General, may I ask you something?" Sarah's voice came through the comm as her fighter crossed into the outer sensor range of the Nexari formation. In all your years of conquest, have you ever lost a ship to an enemy you couldn't see coming? Explain your meaning, human. I mean an opponent that was close enough to touch but invisible to your senses until the moment of attack. An enemy that existed in the same space as your ships without being detected. Kazeth was silent for several seconds, and Sarah could imagine him reviewing his tactical database for any engagement that matched her description. The Nexari had faced stealth technology before, but their sensors were sophisticated enough to penetrate most concealment systems given enough time and processing power. Impossible, the general finally replied. Our sensor arrays can detect quantum fluctuations at the subatomic level. No known stealth technology can completely mask a vessel's presence at close range. No known stealth technology, Sarah agreed. But what about unknown stealth technology? What about approaches to concealment that your doctrine has never encountered because no one has ever thought to try them? Sarah's fighter was now less than 10 kilometers from the nearest Nexari cruiser, close enough that she could see individual weapon emplacements on its hull. The ship was a masterpiece of alien engineering, its sleek form optimized for both speed and firepower. Under normal circumstances, it could have destroyed her fighter with a single shot from its point defense systems. But these were not normal circumstances. AI systems online, Sarah announced, and suddenly her tactical display exploded with new information. The artificial intelligence network was sharing its analysis of Nexari sensor capabilities, highlighting blind spots and vulnerabilities that no human pilot could have identified in real time. More importantly, the AI was implementing concealment protocols that existed at the very edge of known physics. Instead of trying to hide Sarah's fighter from the enemy sensors, the systems began creating false readings that made the Nexari instruments report exactly what they expected to see. Nothing. Sensor contact lost, came a report from the Nexari cruiser. Target has disappeared from all tracking systems. Impossible. Kazeth's voice was sharp with disbelief. No stealth system can function at that proximity to our sensors, recalibrate instruments and reacquire target. But Sarah's fighter hadn't disappeared. It had become something that the Nexari sensors couldn't recognize as a threat. The AI systems had analyzed the aliens' technological assumptions and found ways to exploit them, creating concealment effects that worked by making enemy instruments ignore what they were seeing, rather than hiding it completely. General, Sarah's voice seemed to come from nowhere, transmitted on frequencies that bypassed normal detection methods. Let me introduce you to the concept of perception warfare. Sometimes the best way to hide isn't to become invisible. Sometimes it's to become something that your enemy's brain simply refuses to acknowledge as real. The Nexari cruiser was frantically scanning the space around it, but its instruments kept reporting empty vacuum, despite the fact that Sarah's fighter was now close enough to read the ship's hull markings with the naked eye. The AI had created a perfect illusion, one that worked not by deceiving the sensors, but by exploiting the logical frameworks that interpreted sensor data. This is what human innovation looks like when we stop trying to match your technology and start thinking about problems you've never considered. Sarah continued. We don't need better sensors or stronger weapons. We just need better ideas about how to use the tools we already have. Sarah's fighter was now in position for what conventional military doctrine would have considered an impossible attack. She was close enough to the cruiser to touch its hull, but completely undetectable by any sensor system the Nexari possessed. More importantly, the AI was providing targeting data that identified specific vulnerabilities in the ship's structure, weak points that could be exploited by precisely placed attacks. But here's the thing, General, Sarah said as her weapons systems powered up. I'm not here to destroy your ships. I'm here to prove a point about the nature of warfare itself. Instead of firing on the cruiser's vulnerable points, Sarah's fighter began broadcasting a signal that penetrated directly into the ship's communication systems. The signal carried a complete technical analysis of every vulnerability the AI had identified, transmitted in standard Nexari military format so there could be no confusion about its meaning. What? What is this? Kazeth's voice carried a note of shock that no amount of military training could suppress. That, General, is a tactical analysis of your fleet's defensive weaknesses, compiled by artificial intelligence systems in real time, Sarah explained. Every ship, every formation, every protocol you're using. The AI has identified 17 different ways to neutralize your flagship alone, using nothing but conventional human weapons and tactics you've never encountered. The implications were staggering. If human AI could analyze and counter Nexari military technology in real time, it meant that every advantage the aliens had built over millennia of conquest could be neutralized by superior tactical thinking. But I'm not going to attack your ships, Sarah continued, because destroying your fleet wouldn't prove what needs to be proven. Instead, I'm going to show you something that will change your understanding of what's possible in space combat. Sarah's fighter began moving again, but instead of engaging the cruiser, she headed back toward the debris field where the bombardment was about to begin. Her ship's engines left a bright trail across the darkness, easily visible to every sensor in the Nexari fleet. All ships prepare to execute bombardment, Kazith ordered, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Eliminate the debris field and all defensive installations. Execute bombardment, Sarah agreed through the comm system. See what happens when you try to destroy something that's already learned how to rebuild itself faster than you can tear it down.
The Nexari battleships opened fire with enough combined energy to crack a small moon.
Brilliant beams of coherent energy lanced across space, vaporizing asteroids and station wreckage with casual ease. The bombardment was a demonstration of raw power that few civilizations could match, a display of the overwhelming force that had made the Nexari masters of the galaxy. But as the energy beams struck their targets, something impossible began to happen. The debris field didn't disappear. Instead, it seemed to flow like liquid, restructuring itself even as it was being destroyed. The AI systems had taken control of the gravitational interactions between fragments, using the bombardment's own energy to accelerate the formation of new defensive positions. What is this? Kazith's voice was barely a whisper. This, General, Sarah replied, is what happens when you fight an enemy that can turn your own weapons into tools for its survival. Welcome to warfare in the age of adaptive artificial intelligence. The bombardment continued, but its effects were becoming increasingly counterproductive. Each destroyed platform was being replaced by two new ones, assembled from debris that had been repositioned by AI-controlled gravitational fields. The more energy the Nexari poured into the attack, the more material the AI systems had to work with, and through it all, Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with quiet certainty. Your 20-year winning streak, General. It ends today. The Nexari bombardment had been raging for 6 minutes, and General Kazith was beginning to understand that he was facing something beyond his experience. The debris field that should have been vaporized was not only intact, but had somehow grown larger and more threatening with each passing moment. His instruments reported impossible readings, structures assembling themselves from scattered fragments, defensive networks that became stronger under direct attack, weapons platforms that seemed to reproduce like living organisms. Cease bombardment, Kazith ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. All ships, return to defensive formation. The silence that followed felt heavier than the violence that had preceded it. Across the Nexari fleet, officers stared at sensor readings that defied everything they understood about physics and engineering. The enemy defensive network had not only survived a bombardment capable of destroying a planetary defense grid, it had actually grown stronger as a result. General, came a hesitant voice from one of his subordinates. Our tactical computers are reporting that the enemy defensive capability has increased by approximately 300% since the bombardment began. The AI systems appear to be using our own energy weapons as a power source for construction activities. Kazith closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 20 years of undefeated combat service pressing down on him. In 2 decades of conquest, he had never encountered an enemy that could turn his greatest strength into their advantage. The very weapons that had crushed the defenses of 47 different worlds were being used against him by an opponent he couldn't fully comprehend. Captain Chen, Kazith said, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there at the beginning of the engagement. I believe I am beginning to understand why your fellow humans chose your particular call sign. Sarah's fighter was moving through the transformed debris field like a conductor directing an orchestra. Around her, the AI-controlled platforms moved in perfect harmony, their positions constantly shifting to maintain optimal defensive coverage, while simultaneously expanding the network's capabilities. Ghostwing isn't about disappearing from battles, is it? Kazith continued. It's about making things appear that were never supposed to exist. Solutions that emerge from nowhere, strategies that manifest like specters from the quantum foam itself. You're learning, General, Sarah replied, and there was no mockery in her voice. But there's still one more lesson I need to teach you. Something about the difference between tactical victory and strategic understanding. Sarah's ship was approaching the center of the debris field again, where the AI systems had constructed something that made Kazeth's tactical officers struggle to find words for their reports. What had once been the shattered remains of an orbital station had been transformed into a structure that seemed to blend organic growth patterns with crystalline mathematical precision. The AI had not simply rebuilt the station, it had created something entirely new, a hybrid of human engineering and artificial intelligence that existed at the boundary between technology and art. Flowing metal structures curved through space like frozen music, while energy patterns danced between crystalline nodes and configurations that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm.
General, one of Kazith's officers reported, his voice barely steady. Our linguists are attempting to decode the energy patterns emanating from the central structure. The signals appear to be
mathematical proofs. Theorems related to strategic thinking and tactical optimization. The AI isn't just building defenses, Sarah explained. It's creating new mathematical frameworks for understanding conflict itself. Every moment of our engagement has been teaching it something fundamental about the nature of warfare, and now it's sharing those insights with anyone capable of understanding the language of pure mathematics. Kazith stared at the readings on his command display, trying to process implications that stretched far beyond a single battle. If human artificial intelligence could derive new theoretical foundations for military strategy in real time, it meant that every tactical doctrine in the galaxy was potentially obsolete.
But why? Kazith asked.
Why reveal such capabilities to me? Why not simply destroy my fleet and claim victory? Because victory in a single battle isn't the point, General. The point is changing the fundamental balance of power in the galaxy. Sarah's voice carried a weight of purpose that made Kazith realize he had been thinking about this engagement in entirely the wrong terms. You see, for 3 years, humanity has been fighting a defensive war against technologically superior opponents. We've been reacting to alien strategies, trying to match alien capabilities, playing by rules that were designed to ensure our defeat. But today, that changes. Sarah's ship was now at the heart of the transformed station, surrounded by structures that pulsed with energy patterns too complex for organic minds to fully comprehend. The AI systems had created something that was part fortress, part laboratory, and part monument to the power of human innovation, augmented by artificial intelligence. Today we proved that technological superiority isn't the only path to victory, Sarah continued. Today, we demonstrate that human creativity combined with artificial intelligence can create solutions that no amount of advanced alien technology can anticipate or counter. The implications were rippling outward from the Kepler 442 system at the speed of light. Human listening posts throughout the sector were recording everything, transmitting data back to Earth and the scattered human colonies. More importantly, they were uploading the AI's new strategic theorems to other artificial intelligence systems throughout human space. General Kazith, Sarah said, I want you to understand something important. Your fleet is not trapped here. You could leave anytime you want. Your ships are faster and more maneuverable than our defensive platforms. You have multiple escape routes available. Then why, Kazith asked slowly, do I feel as though I have already lost? Because you have, but not in the way you think. You haven't lost a battle, General. You've lost the war itself, and you just don't realize it yet. Sarah's tactical display was now showing the broader scope of what was happening throughout human space. In dozens of star systems, similar defensive networks were coming online. The AI systems that had been hidden throughout human territory for months were revealing themselves, implementing strategies based on the lessons learned in the Kepler 442 engagement. While we've been talking, General, similar operations have been activating in 43 different star systems. Every major human colony, every strategic resource center, every key supply route now has defenses that your intelligence networks never detected, and your tactical doctrine can't counter. The scale of the deception was staggering. Sarah hadn't just planned an ambush in a single system. She had coordinated a galaxy-spanning operation that had fundamentally altered the strategic balance of the entire war. Months of careful preparation had culminated in a single moment, when humanity revealed that it was no longer the desperate retreating force that the Nexari had been pursuing. Impossible, Kazith whispered. Such coordination would require exactly the kind of thinking that your species can't match. Sarah finished. Distributed intelligence networks, adaptive strategic planning, the ability to coordinate complex operations across vast distances without relying on rigid command hierarchies. Kazith's sensor officers were reporting new contacts throughout the system. Human ships were emerging from concealment, not the desperate survivors he had expected, but advanced vessels equipped with technology that his databases couldn't identify. More importantly, they were moving in formation patterns that his tactical computers couldn't predict or counter.
You see, General, while you've been fighting the war you expected, we've been preparing for the war we needed. We've been building not just new weapons or new ships, but new ways of thinking about conflict itself. The human fleet that was revealing itself was unlike anything in the galaxy's military history. Instead of massive battleships designed to overwhelm opponents through superior firepower, the ships were smaller, more agile, and equipped with AI systems that allowed them to coordinate in ways that mimicked the behavior of living organisms. We've learned something that no other species has understood, Sarah continued. Technology isn't just about building better tools. It's about creating better ways of thinking. And human thinking, augmented by artificial intelligence, can out-evolve any static tactical doctrine. General Kazeth found himself in a position he had never experienced before. His fleet was intact, his weapons were functional, and he retained numerical superiority. But he was facing an opponent that had fundamentally altered the rules of engagement, creating conditions where conventional military thinking was not just inadequate, but actively counterproductive. Captain Chen, Kazeth said finally, I believe I understand now why they call you Ghostwing. You make possibilities appear that were never supposed to exist. You create victories out of situations that should have been defeats. That's part of it, Sarah acknowledged. That there's something else. The real reason I chose this call sign, the reason it means more to me than just a clever tactical approach. End of footnote. Sarah's ship was moving again, heading toward the edge of the debris field where a single piece of wreckage caught the light of the twin suns. It was a fragment of hull plating from a civilian transport, one of the evacuation ships that had been destroyed during the Nexari assault on Kepler. 442, sighed 3 years ago. Do you see that piece of debris, General? That's from the transport ship New Hope. 6,000 civilians, including 800 children, killed when your forces opened fire on an unarmed evacuation convoy. The silence that followed was complete. Kazeth had destroyed so many worlds, conquered so many species, that individual atrocities had become mere statistics in his military record. But Sarah's words forced him to confront the human cost of his victories in a way that made tactical abstractions suddenly, terrifyingly personal. The reason they call me Ghostwing, Sarah said quietly, is because I fight for the ghosts. Every human who died believing that we couldn't match alien military superiority. Every pilot who sacrificed themselves in hopeless battles because they thought that was the only way to slow down your advance. Every civilian who died thinking that humanity's time in the galaxy was ending. Sarah's ship touched the fragment of hull plating, and for a moment her fighter was motionless against the backdrop of stellar debris. Today, General, those ghosts can rest. Because today, we prove that human ingenuity can create miracles that alien technology can't match. The tactical display showed that the engagement was effectively over. The Nexari fleet was surrounded by defensive networks that could destroy them if they attempted to attack, but they were also free to leave if they chose withdrawal. It was a perfect demonstration of strategic superiority, the ability to control the outcome of a conflict without requiring the total destruction of one's opponent. General Kazeth, Sarah said, your 20-year record of undefeated victories ends today. Not because I destroyed your fleet, but because I proved that human strategic thinking can create conditions where your tactical superiority becomes irrelevant. I understand, Kazeth replied, and his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect, or perhaps fear. You have achieved something unprecedented, Captain Chen.
You have defeated me without destroying me, which is perhaps the most complete victory possible.
As Sarah's ship moved away from the debris field, heading toward the waiting human fleet, she opened a final communication to the Nexari general.
Tell your superiors what you've seen here today, General. Tell them that humanity is no longer fighting the war they understand. We're fighting the war we choose, using strategies they can't predict and tactics they can't counter. And tell them, Sarah added, her voice carrying across space with quiet certainty, that Ghostwing sends her regards. Behind her, the transformed debris field continued to pulse with energy patterns that would puzzle xenoarchaeologists for generations to come. The AI systems had created something that was part memorial, part fortress, and part declaration that human creativity, when properly focused, could reshape the very foundations of galactic civilization. The 20-year record was shattered. The war had taken a turn that no one could have predicted, and in the cold depths of space, between the light of twin suns and the shadows of broken worlds, humanity had proven that sometimes the greatest weapon isn't superior technology or overwhelming force. Sometimes the greatest weapon is the simple, stubborn refusal to fight the battle your enemy expects you to lose.